Okay,
Okay, recording started.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I was just on mute. I was sneezing.
Okay.
I don't think people want to hear that, so.
Yeah. Let me send Saab a quick note. 1 second. Make sure that everything's okay. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Hey Sherwood, well and yourself?
Doing well, doing well. Good to see you.
Happy to hear. Yeah, I haven't been here in quite a while. I'm sorry.
That's all
Alfonso
right.
is usually our representative of the standards working group.
Yeah, you guys are making good progress. We were talking last meeting about potentially doing a presentation on kind of the status of your work and maybe a little bit later in the year, maybe in October or November.
That will actually be great. Yeah, and it's because we have made progress that we are now actually explicitly looking for funding to, formalize some of the things, which is why I thought I really needed to shift
Yeah,
some things around to be able to attend this call today.
absolutely, absolutely. I Sav kind of got together with me and gave me a kind of a high level, and it seems really interesting. So glad we could share. I'm still waiting. There he is. Great. So I'll probably just kick off and try to have a high level of what I normally do, and then we're going to be having a presentation from Sav. Sav, how you doing? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today.
Absolutely. So for today's call, we're going to be having a presentation from Sav. As many of you know, he's head of grants at Gitcoin, and he's going to be providing a presentation on funding what matters. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see my screen right now?
Not yet.
Okay, 1 second. There we go. Sure. But I want to do a couple kind of housekeeping items first. First, is there anybody on the call who is joining us for the first time? I would love to have a quick introduction if there is. Just feel free to speak. Share a little bit about, how you learned about the SIG, and kind of where you're coming from and what your interest is. Would love to hear from you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So pleased to meet you all. My name is Pedro. I'm from Brazil. I'm a student, a master's student at University of São Paulo, and we're developing a project using Hyperledger Fabric. It has to do with reforestation, so we have forestation assets. And so I heard about SIG. I'm not sure how, but I really wanted to attend to one of your meetings because it seems like we're doing things with a lot of synergy. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Sounds great, Pedro. Welcome. Now, can you tell me a little bit about the project that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but basically we're doing something like the idea is to promote forestation, so like planting trees.
Yes.
And the idea is like um, we've seen that this is something that it's really hard to do. Like landowners usually do not use their lands to plant trees because, well, it's not really profitable. And the idea is to try to make it somehow like using the ideas of tokenization. And so we have forested areas and also forestation assets that we can tokenize. And the idea is to have like these incentives for landowners That's
Very
more or less of it. We're working on it for more or less 2 years now. It's a research project that maybe someday, hopefully, it is going to be something real.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining.
Yeah,
Sounds
thank
very
you.
interesting. Is there anybody else who's joining for the first time?
Hi, buddy. That's me, Abby. I'm joining for the first time here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, so I work with BASF. It's a big chemical company, and I'm part of the agriculture practice. And we've created a traceability solution using Hyperledger Fabric for cotton. So basically, when you wear a t-shirt, you can literally find out who produced it, where did the seed come from, what was happening on the field. And we've been able to tokenize pretty much every activity throughout the chain. And the intention is this, that we are going with a platform approach, wherein we can provide farmers the ability to store their sustainable actions into tokenized format and make it much more, let's say, value driven, usable, and also create transparency in the value chain.
That's
So
really interesting.
that's where I'm coming from. Yeah.
I highly recommend that you take a look at a project that we have done within this SIG called the Net Emissions Token Network. Essentially, it is essentially a tool or a platform to allow for the tokenization of carbon emissions across at the product level across scope for scope 3, scope 3,
Yeah.
2, and 1, obviously, but what you're doing might plug nicely into that. So I'd take a look at that.
What's the name of the project you mentioned? Could you send this in the chat?
Yeah, I'll drop it into the chat as we have Saab presents, and you can see that. Absolutely.
Super.
Very good. So just kind of kicking things off, one things I wanted to kind of go through quickly is our antitrust policy notice. The Linux Foundation is in an antitrust environment, so be sure to read that if you're participating or developing within Hyperledger. We also have a Hyperledger code of conduct that's important to be aware of and familiarize yourself with if you're going to be joining and significantly participating within Hyperledger. With that, I'd like to hand the floor over to Sav. And Sav, do you have something you want to share your screen?
Yeah, for sure. Right. So turn on video. Hi, I'm Sav. Good to meet all of you. I can share my screen here. So let me grab the right window. And
Yep.
can everyone see it?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the time today. As you can tell by my background, I'm an avid guitar player. If you're wondering what kind of music, hard rock, heavy metal, I'm wearing the Alice in Chains shirt. I live 40 miles southeast of Seattle, so I guess by proxy, I didn't have much of a choice that way. I got interested in the concept of grants working with the 501c3 food bank here in Washington State, where I live. I started it as just kind of like a bear market hobby, as I call it, researching Web3 grants. And what started as like a hobby has turned into a career for me. I'm 42 years old, so I'm definitely not young, but I guess I'm not old yet either. And I feel fortunate that, this late in my career, I've been able to pivot to something I truly love. And, the old adage, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And so that's definitely how I feel. Over the last few years working around grants, I've been a grantee. I've helped projects with grant matching. I've consulted for grant programs, drove adoption of different type of grants tooling, which we'll talk about a little bit in my presentation. I am now the head of grants at Gitcoin. So if you can see a theme in terms of the word grants, I do a lot of that. And then if you want to follow me on X, I'm at Sovereign Signal. And then if you're on Farcaster, at Sov. So the conversation I want to have today is really jumping in a little bit to like, who is Gitcoin, right? Some of you may be aware of Gitcoin, may have heard of us. We have a heritage of, supporting digital public goods and open source software, different types of cause initiatives like climate and things through the Gitcoin grants rounds that we run. So Gitcoin really started as this idea in 2017 by our founder, Kevin Owocki. Kevin recognized that open source software developers were traditionally under incentivized for or not incentivized at all for the type of work that they're doing. So Kevin felt that crypto could be a good way to address that. And so he started doing hackathons and bounties and going through these different ideas on how to use crypto incentives to incentivize that type of building. In 2020, there was a white paper that was released by Vitalik Buterin and Glenn Weil around quadratic funding, which was kind of this novel fundraising mechanism that democratized the process of fundraising. When Kevin saw that, a light bulb went off, and that was the genesis of what we call Gitcoin Grants. Gitcoin Grants is the program that I now run in my role here at Gitcoin, and it uses the quadratic funding mechanism to fund all different sorts of initiatives, specifically open source software, digital public goods, and then other community type rounds. So over the last few years, we've now done 20 seasons of Gitcoin Grants that runs quarterly. We have the next occurrence of Gitcoin Grants coming up in August. And over that time, we've moved from a centralized company that was incubated under consensus now to a DAO that all of us as contributors work for. About 18 months ago, there was a conscious decision within Gitcoin to take the centralized stack that was running at that time on AWS that we developed this quadratic funding mechanism on top of, and decentralize that into what we call the Allo protocol. Allo protocol is a smart contract layer that we'll talk about a little bit later that essentially enables the easy spin up of coordination and funding mechanisms. And we've been building on top of it. And there's also a pretty active ecosystem of builders that are starting to build on top of that as well. So over the past few years at Gitcoin, we've got some fairly impressive numbers. We've seen 4.2 million donations come in, funding different types of initiatives. Over 3,900 projects now have raised funds through Gitcoin Grants, and we've contributed north of 60 million in USD value towards public goods. We're well known for grants in the space. But as we look at Gitcoin 2.0, really the evolution of Gitcoin it's much more than Gitcoin Grants. We still run the Gitcoin Grants program. We're still all about digital public goods and open source software. But as we build out this Allo protocol and we start to build out the apps that sit on top of it, some of those apps can be GrantStack, which is a tool that we built that allows any community to run direct grants and quadratic funding. We built out Easy Retro PGF, which is a mechanism that allows anyone to run retro PGF rounds in the flavor of optimism, if you're familiar with that. And then we're working with other communities, like I think I heard Superfluid maybe mentioned. We work with them and have built out streaming quadratic funding. We've worked with grant chips to build that out. Endowment, if any of you are familiar with that, some of the mechanisms that Endowment uses is built on Allo. So we really want Gitcoin 2.0 to kind of be this future where Gitcoin is less just this allocator of funding through Gitcoin Grants, so that still remains important to us, and more the coordination layer for capital allocation across the crypto space. As we scale that application layer, we also want to scale the program layer. So for the longest time, the program was the Gitcoin Grants program. Now Gitcoin is running programs for all sorts of different, grant programs across the space. So myself and my team, we design, implement, and manage those programs for the likes of Avalanche, Say, Polygon, and many others. So when we think about the mechanisms that are most common today, there's direct grants, and all of you are probably familiar with direct grants. I would say direct grants is great for what it's good at, in terms of narrow scope, RFPs, funding forward-looking ideas, but it doesn't allow for community decision-making and collective decision-making and how funding is allocated. That's really where quadratic funding comes in. Quadratic funding basically says you still develop an eligibility criteria, open up applications for grantees to apply based on their fit towards that eligibility criteria. But as those applications come in, someone will approve them into a round. An organization or set of organizations can set up an amount of funds that would be considered a matching fund. But when the round opens, people come in and they donate with their dollars and vote for the projects that they find the most interesting. In the Gitcoin Grants round, people can vote with as little as $1. In our latest round of Gitcoin Grants, you can kind of see some of the stats at grants.gitcoin.co. We raised about $630,000 in donations across 35,000 supporters and 173,000 unique donations. As those donations come in, those donations count as votes towards the project. and the votes help to make the decision on how that matching pool of funds is allocated. So a simple example I can give around quadratic funding is if you have projects A and B. Let's say project A gets 1 donation for $100. Project B gets 10 donations for $10. Both of those projects received $100 in total donations. Project B received more votes, so they're going to get a higher proportional share of the matching pool. So you can see where quadratic funding takes kind of these ideals around crowdfunding and extends that out to allow communities to make decisions on funding what matters to them and then allocating funds based on that. Retro funding works in a similar way to quadratic funding. Optimism has been a pioneer of this, and many people are probably familiar with Optimism's retro funding model. The way that retro funding works is an organization will put up a pool of funds. They'll still set up an eligibility criteria. Applications will come into that. People will approve those applications into the round. And then you'll have a pool of experts known as badge holders, if you look at the Optimism model, that will look at the projects based on their merit and the impact that they've created up to that point. They'll allocate votes to those different projects. And then based on the weighting of the votes across the different badge holders, funds are dynamically allocated. We've taken the model that Optimism uses for retro funding and adapted that into a tool that anyone can use called Easy Retro PGF. There's been rounds run with Cello, libp2p, Filecoin, Pocket Network, and a few others. So we're definitely starting to see traction, kind of gaining here around this mechanism. And we're actively working with Optimism today to develop a variant of retro funding known as auto retro funding that would take human decision making out of the equation and look at network level metrics and allow ecosystems to twist the knobs and dials around those different metrics that they want to measure, and then give incentives based on network level activity and like true quantitative measures of impact versus leaving that open to human decision making. So I shared this slide just to give some ideas around the most common mechanisms that I see in the space today, and I work with programs to implement. But as we'll talk about a little bit later in the deck, there's a whole plethora of different types of mechanisms that can be unlocked through crypto that really we at Gitcoin look as the potential of what we'd love to build and what we'd love to experiment with and see what other mechanisms we can help to gain traction. Why is this important? I think many of you are probably familiar with the current state of OSS, open source software funding. I would describe it as using mostly legacy nonprofit, fundraising models. There's ultimately a lack of alignment of incentives, many times for open source software and digital public goods development. The same can be said of climate research and regenerative, types of research and initiatives, where I believe that more democratic and novel forms of funding and funding mechanisms can help to change that, right? A common example I give, you probably all seen the meme where it's like all of our modern infrastructure is held up by some random person in Nebraska that's been thanklessly maintaining something since 2003. I'm proud to say that through Gitcoin Grants and our open source software initiatives, we've been helping to fund, these little blocks that hold up the hyperstructure. And we'd love through conversations like this and kind of growing awareness of the work that we do, have more people come and participate in the Gitcoin Grants rounds and be thinking about, if you're an organization that is out there giving grants or looking at ways that you can allocate funding in more democratic or novel ways, that Gitcoin would love to have a conversation with you about that. We've worked with organizations like UNICEF. We're currently in conversations with the World Food Program, the American Heart Association, and others. And so Gitcoin is one of those projects that I'm biased, but I feel like has crossed the chasm from just the world of crypto and Web3 to actually working with more real world projects, creating real world impact with the types of projects and initiatives that we funded. So really, the opportunity that we feel that we unlock is like this plurality of offering different types of funding mechanisms. We believe that there's an opportunity to create more aligned incentives, reward kind of real world impact, and ultimately get from this kind of fragile state, as I would describe it, around the current state of legacy nonprofit fundraising, to a more anti-fragile approach with diversity, and different options that you can choose to apply kind of based on the need and the use case. So when we really look at the TAM and like the greater potential for Gitcoin, really we look at it like this, right? Like you've already seen me mention a few of the types of mechanisms that we've developed. There's a longer list than this, but these are all the things that are available on Allo today for ecosystems that deploy Allo. and start to use it. Any of these mechanisms can be unlocked to experiment with or allocate funding through. But as we look into the future, you could see there's like a whole other like subset of opportunities that way in terms of new types of coordination and funding mechanisms that we can start to build. If you're interested in this concept, I would recommend that you go to coordinationmechanisms.gitcoin.co, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but this is a page that was developed that really shows like from a coordination mechanism, and many times coordination mechanisms and funding mechanisms are synonymous. What ancient mechanisms we have, so things that everyone's familiar with, like tithing, taxes, voting, markets. As we move into the Web2 space, you can see futarchy, ranked choice voting, network goods. But as we move into Web3, everything in blue here is really like the potential that's unlocked, through crypto and through decentralization to build different types of coordination and funding mechanisms that can drive new and interesting types of impact, right? So I look at this site often when I have conversations with ecosystems that are looking at ways that they can do something different. We like to talk about this and kind of say, based on the desired outcomes that you're looking for, how might we be able to look at some of these more novel types of funding and coordination mechanisms and map those to your needs and ultimately experiment, right? So with that, the call to action here is like, I'd love to hear from anyone and everyone on this call around, if you're thinking of ways that you can allocate funding in a more democratic way or a more novel way, we'd love to explore those conversations and kind of show you what is possible through Allo and the work that we've done at Gitcoin. Or if you're on the other side of that equation, right? And you're actively looking at ways that you can participate in different types of funding and then lock more of that funding for initiatives and causes that you're pursuing. Anyone can go to grants.gitcoin.co and see the types of opportunities that we have out there with the many different grant rounds and organizations that we're partnering with, right? So I'm not a big fan of like super long decks. That's literally all I've got. I find these conversations are much more interesting when we open them up for discussion. So yeah, happy to do that, answer any questions anyone might have and explain, anything around Gitcoin that maybe I missed or that you're curious about.
Thank you so much, Sav. I'd love to open up the floor to questions anybody might have. Feel free to just speak, raise your hand. I guess I can also kick it off. One question I have, Sav, because you have people who are kind of voting with their dollars for funding, what would you recommend for projects that are working to get their story out? How much of the grant money is awarded based on the utility of the idea and how much, I guess what I should ask is how important is it kind of communications and almost marketing to get an idea across and get people excited about it? And what are some good examples that you've seen of projects that have done a good job of that?
Yeah, no, great question. There's actually kind of like two sides of that spectrum, right? Where you might look at quadratic funding as I explain it and say, wow, well, what if I just spun up 1,000 wallets, each with $1 and voted? There's definitely a risk of Sybil attack when it comes to quadratic funding. We work quite a bit around that at Gitcoin, where we've developed different ways that we can suss out Sybil attackers. And essentially, we call it a process of cluster matching, where we can look at how different wallets and patterns cluster together and remove those types of attacks from Sybil, from the matching results, right? And so I would say one part of it is, we definitely want to be cautious that when using more democratic fundraising mechanisms, it is susceptible to attack versus like centralized decision making. And there are ways to protect against that we've spent a lot of time kind of thinking through and testing with our own Gitcoin Grants program. The other end of that spectrum is kind of what you describe around, marketing and driving awareness. In some parts, that's the beauty and the challenge of quadratic funding, right? Is in a direct kind of grants funding model, where all decision making is centralized and it's a very closed process. The grantee or the applicant really only needs to market to the grantor or the one person that's making a decision, right? That's all fine and good. But when you open it up to kind of these more democratic methods and you open it up to kind of like crowdsourcing that, if you think about it in the same mode as like the crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter and others that are out there, many times as people are requesting, dollars for their causes or their initiatives, they're out there actively kind of marketing themselves. And over time, as projects come back and continue to participate in the rounds that we run at Gitcoin, we see that there's a certain forcing mechanism that happens where if you're not marketing yourself well, and if you're not beholden to the commitments that you make round over round to using that funding and pushing it back into the project and showing positive growth, you're going to see, kind of like less of an onus on the community to continue to fund that. So in many ways, it kind of like it inverts that process where now it opens that up to everyone to be able to introspect and see, the types of work that projects are doing. And it puts an onus on them to self-report, self-market, and find ways to get creative around that. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, right? But in my mind, like when I think about that, it's kind of two sides of that spectrum where you want people to self-market, you want people to drive awareness of their project, but you also need to protect against, kind of that side of it where, bad actors could occur and you remove them from the results in terms of how the matching funds are allocated.
Got it. Thank you.
One question.
Sure.
Once funding is approved and you have a project, what's the ownership stake form that you normally use? So when you give funding out and then if something becomes commercialized, what's the ownership stake method you usually use?
Yeah, so if you're talking about like if people invest, quote unquote, in a project and then they get some form of like equity or ownership of that, most of the rounds that we run don't approach it that way, right? There is a growing type of grant funding that I see that are kind of like convertible grants, right? Where Solana Foundation and a few others have launched these programs where it starts with giving a grant that has an upper limit of say 25 or 50K. And then once that project has proven themselves that they can hit the milestones and deliver and kind of build, to the vision that they show, then there could be equity stakes opened up through ecosystem funds or other means to take, some share of ownership in that project and kind of like take it to the next level. What we do see with Gitcoin Grants is like Gitcoin Grants and the programs that we run can be a great early signal to VCs and other investors, angel investors, et cetera, for projects that are building things truly interesting that communities are interested in. And then they may reach out to them, directly and have those types of conversations. But for our platform, that is not something that, we really approach right now. It's like building in different types of ownership stake. But that being said, I do think that when you think about unlocking different types of coordination mechanisms, there could be coordination mechanisms that eventually are built that way, and maybe some of those we'll eventually explore, that could open that up where as a project takes in early funding and it is more of like, truly open source or a digital public good, and then they gain traction or they develop monetization models or these types of things, where it could be converted. And that might be interesting to be able to do, more on kind of like an individual kind of crowdsource level versus like more centralized with traditional VCs or angel investing. But it isn't something that, we've yet built, those types of mechanisms.
Saab, can you talk a little bit about the timing? I mean, can people apply for a grant at any time? Are there certain times of year when it's better? And the other question I have is is there an average grant size that people can anticipate per project?
Yeah, no, good question. So as I mentioned before, the stack that we run is fully decentralized and anyone can go and spin up a grant program at any time. You don't need Gitcoin's permission to do that. Anyone can go to explorer.gitcoin.co, and this site is used to see all of the different rounds that are running on top of our platform today. So you can see there's about 280 of them. So to give an example, I'm helping to run this fund for Say, which is a EVM ecosystem that recently partnered with us to kind of design, implement, and manage their program. So if I'm a builder, I can come to explorer.gitcoin.co, click on Explore Rounds, and I can look at all of the different rounds that are running on top of the Gitcoin platform today and see which of those might be interesting for me to apply to. When you ask questions about average donation size and those types of things, we've actually built some systems inside of Gitcoin Grants where as these rounds run, you can see here's all the projects, here's how much each of those projects have raised in donations thus far. We built a stats page that shows you how much total has been crowdfunded across how many donors and unique donations. And then we built out this other tool called report cards that allows you to go in and see more granular information around each of those projects, how much they've raised in total, and then start to show you kind of like how much has been crowdfunded, and then as matching results get tallied up, how much of that matching pool will be allocated to those projects, right? And so there really isn't like an average amount that we see across the wide swath of the types of rounds that we've run. You know, I've seen some rounds like the Ave Grants round that we just finished up running with them, where the average donation was quite large. It was like 70 or 80 bucks, you know, per person. Typically in our Gitcoin Grants rounds, we usually see an average donation size of between $8 and $10. So it really depends on the size of the round, the types of projects that are running, how many donors come in, you know, all those types of things. But we have created systems that allow that information to be, you know, somewhat transparent, and anyone can kind of log in and see what that looks like across the different rounds.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. And when you were, can you go back, if you can scroll back down, I saw that there were a couple different ones where it wasn't the screen, maybe it was one before where the matching was 0. And I'm wondering what the yeah, so the matched USD, I thought that when funds were raised, there was definitely some sort of match. What are the circumstances like? Why weren't these funds matched for these projects?
This round is still going, right? Is the
Got it,
easy
got
answer
it,
there. So
got
this
it.
is a feature, not a bug. What happens when a round finishes up is you fund a contract, right? And so you never lock funds in a contract with Gitcoin. You always disperse funds at time of payment, right? And so the way this would work is when this round finishes up, the round closes, donations can't come in anymore. And then I, as a round operator or an administrator, can then go in and pull the round results out, look at those. And then there's different checks that we can apply from the Gitcoin side of things to help people know, has the round been Sybil attacked or whatever it might be. The reason we don't show matching amounts when a round is live is it can actually set a bad precedent, because a round like this, I can tell you, there are rounds here on this page right now that are actively Sybil attacking the round, right? And so when we pull those results out and we do our Sybil checks, that's when we actually finalize the matching result. We publish those, and then once those results are ratified or agreed upon by the ecosystem that's running the round and it's uploaded and payments are made, then this page would kind of like fill out with like what those matching amounts are. A typical way that we show that is a great place where you can find all kinds of information on Gitcoin is our governance forums. That's a very common place that in Web3 you see results. And each time we run a round of Gitcoin Grants, we basically announce the program round matching results in a gov post like this. So Umar works for me on my team, and he basically will walk through, you know, what were the key metrics, how many rounds did we run, how much was the matching, how did we get the round calculus, you know, calculation details. We recap COCM, which is actually the mechanism we use for Sybil defense. And then we basically start to show the top projects that have received the most matching funds. We like to put these types of things up, and we recommend with partners that we work with, they do something similar where you publish your results and leave it kind of, you know, open for comment for at least a week or so. That way people have the ability to ask questions, dig into the data, all of those types of things. And then once the community is kind of like, you know, got a certain amount of consensus or agreement around those results, we finalize them. For us, our process is we actually have to push these through a snapshot vote, where our major token holders, the holders of GTC, ratify those results. And then once those results are ratified, funds are released from our treasury, contracts are funded, and then the grantees are paid out.
Got it. Thank you for that detail. Any additional questions from the group? I don't want to take up all the question time. Well, very good. I guess you answered all the questions, Sav.
Yeah, no, thank you for the time. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to meet here. Again, feel free to reach out to me directly. Stav@gitcoin.co is my email. Like I mentioned, I'm on Twitter as well. Happy to answer any questions, or if there's any follow-ups I can take around people that are interested in potentially looking at Gitcoin and our platform to help to allocate funding, or if you're on the other end of that spectrum where you'd like to participate in some of the grant rounds that we're running or learn more. I love to have those kind of questions and just see how I can help, direct and route people to the right places.
Absolutely. Thank you. And just for everybody's information, as normal, this call is being recorded. It's going to be posted onto the Climate Action Accounting Special Interest Group page. So you can kind of come back here and revisit the presentation. Yeah, Sav, thanks so much. Thanks so much for your time. And thank you everybody for joining.
Sure. What is it, Jeff? I do have one question.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Actually,
Sure.
Jeff, have you had a question?
Yeah, just from the website, CA2SIG website, there's an area about getting involved, non-technical involvement. How does that get coordinated? Is that just an email to you? Is it just some kind of discussion? How do you facilitate
Yeah,
that?
if somebody emails are you talking about on the Climate Action and Accounting Special Interest Group?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that email comes to me,
Okay.
and then I share some different resources with people.
Okay. Yeah, the mention of a need for some folks to be involved from a non-technical perspective. That's what I was wondering. How do you initiate that? Okay.
Yep, very good. And I see Saab put his email in there, so everybody can contact him directly if you have any questions. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the
Thanks.
time.
Have a great day.
Thank you.